Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we've got a early impression video on a fragrance that I've been absolutely infatuated with. It's actually one of my favorite oud fragrances, and also I would say probably my favorite fragrance from this house, from the house of Ensar. And the way that I acquired this particular 9.5 ml Pure Parfum decant is from a friend. And it was actually a surprise because what ended up happening is I purchased this off of him, Russian Oud by Areej Dore, and he very kindly slipped this in without me knowing. And so this was a little bit of a surprise, this 9.5 ml Pure Parfum of Tigerlust. And you can see I wear my fragrances. They are not just, pieces to show off for the camera or to sell. I hardly ever sell any of my fragrances. And this one, though, I've worn it a couple times now. I've given it full wears. So some of my early impression videos, it's the very first time I've worn it. Excuse me, not with this one. This one I've got some experience with. And the reason I did that is I was so smitten with it, number one. But number two, I have the juice. So I didn't need to just, talk about it on the very first go around. My feelings on the fragrance have not changed, though, and I'll give you my 2 cents. We'll talk a little bit about the background of the fragrance and how I feel about the whole artisanal oud scene, if you will. And as you guys know, so if you've been following me, you know that my interest in oud as the months and years have gone on has continued to climb. And much of that has been pure disenfranchisement with what has been going on in the I would say mainstream fragrance game. If you take big companies like Puig, if you take companies like LVMH, those type of companies, L'Oreal, I think they've really destroyed perfume for the people who love perfume. And there's very few places to turn. And the two places left to turn is where I am turning. Number one is vintage. I love vintage scents. And my heart is really with vintage. The time, the effort, the ingredients, just the length of time between releases. Chanel once took something like 26 years between masculine releases between Pour Monsieur and Antaeus, or something like that. 22, 24, I forget the exact number. But it was decades of time. So they weren't just pumping them out to satisfy shareholders or to make their stock price increase. They didn't sell just to sell bottles. Whenever they put a release out, it was a artistic endeavor that the perfumer took on himself or herself to create. There were female perfumers even back then, like Francois Caron, and so it was something that the perfumer took a lot of pride in, but they had the final say. It was their product. And the house has basically turned over control. Now what we're seeing is that completely flipped on its head. The perfumers are nothing but slaves to a system that basically values money over everything else. And we're in this system where everything is focus grouped to death. And when they focus group things to death, they take anything that's new or exciting out, and it just becomes the same old rewash, retread, just boring product release over and over and over. And that's where my focus really started to turn to these artisanal houses, like, for example, Russian Adams, Areej Dore, which, just to show you the level of the difference between what you get going to Macy's and buying a Dior product and with what I get with something like this, is the cap on this actually broke. And so there was an issue with the whole... There was an issue with this, and Russian Adam took it upon himself to personally send me a new nozzle atomizer and a new cap. So this cap doesn't go with this bottle traditionally. There was like a wood cap that went with this originally, but that's the difference here. These are brands that kind of do things like they used to do hundreds of years ago back in the day. And you get so much more for your money with them. And also my love of oud has grown. And that's where Tigerlust came in. Because Tigerlust happens to be the very first Ensar fragrance I've ever smelled. And I just did a fresh spray before the video. I don't know if you can kind of see the sheen on my hand from the pure Parfum. It just sticks to you. Oh, it's beautiful. The dry down is equally as beautiful, but there's not very much transition in this scent. If you love the smell, you'll pretty much love it all the way through. But the quality of the ingredients is stunning. So let me break it down for you to my nose, what I get. We'll talk a little bit about the scent. And again, this is just an early impression video, so take that with a grain of salt. I do not own a full bottle. I would love to have a full bottle. I almost bought a full bottle until I realized the price tag on the 50 ml Pure Parfum. But I am very much enjoying my my 9.5 ml Discovery Atomizer. So thanks to you. You know who you are. I think you want to remain anonymous, so I won't shout you out on the video. But thank you for including this. It's been a real honor and a pleasure getting to know this one. Okay, so Ensar Oud Tigerlust Pure Parfum. How does it open up? So it basically opens up with many notes coming at you at once. And they come at you in a way where it's almost impossible to discern and catch everything flying by you within the first couple minutes. It goes very quickly in the opening. And basically what you end up smelling is you kind of get this spicy, almost like turmeric-like smell mixed with allspice and peppery, a bit of Szechuan pepper. And Szechuan pepper always comes across as smelling slightly fiery to me. You know, there's this fiery-like smell with the Szechuan pepper, and you get some of that. But before you know it, by the time you blink, you will realize that you're going to start smelling things like smell like birch. You're going to smell leather, you're going to smell oud, you're going to smell woods, you're going to smell beautiful sandalwood, Timor sandalwood, and Mysore sandalwood. And you're just going to get hit with this just this, you know, pot of accords and ingredients that blend together in a beautiful fashion. This is a million miles away from what you'll smell at Dore or Chanel, or, you know, it's just completely different than what the French houses are doing nowadays. Hermes, this is completely off the beaten path, right? If you are an oud lover, and if you love real oud, high quality oud, this is a fragrance that I can definitely endorse. In fact, if I was going to buy another Ensar fragrance, I think it would be this one. It's just a matter of they're so expensive, do I need another one? We'll talk about that too here in a little bit. But the first thing is the blend. The first thing that I really start to pick up after that, let's say, couple minutes of heavy spices and, you know, that that turmeric-like spiciness blended with oud and little touches of animalic notes here and there. The very first thing that I pick up after that settles down a little bit is what I call the Ensar Ambergris. And I call it the Ensar Ambergris because it's this sparkly ambergris accord that I've noticed in multiple Ensar fragrances that I've talked about. So one is Ensar's EO1. I actually like this enough that I did end up getting a bottle. And that sparkly ambergris accord, there's a couple versions of EO number 1, I should mention, by the way. There's a couple versions of EO number 1. This is the original one with the bottom here built in. The newer bottles, I think, don't have a bottom on the leather, if I recall correctly reading about it, right? But, I mean, geez, look at that juice. So, this sparkly ambergris accord, you will also smell in some of the flankers of EO number 1 and EO number 2. So, EO number 2 is much more about musk, and EO number 1 is more about that castoreum and leather and stuff like that, to my nose. And I have a video on the channel of a fragrance called EO number 1 Assam, which, you know, talks about the region in India, the Assam region, where, you know, oud is very famous there. Even some of the big houses like Amouage and and Louis Vuitton talk about, you know, Assam oud being in their fragrances. But EO1 Assam also had this sort of sparkly ambergris-like accord that I've come to kind of associate with Ensar's DNA. And it's here. And that sparkly ambergris-like accord is something that you will notice in his other fragrances, but you'll get it in Tigerlust as well. But one of the differences is that even though this has castoreum, so even though that Tigerlust has castoreum, you do get a bit of this leathery profile that will remind you of EO number 1. So there is a little bit of a ghost recognition of EO number 1. If you smelled EO number 1, or if you've smelled, I think it was called Sultan Attar. I forget exactly. There was a oil that he made that apparently ended up being turned into EO number 1. Someone was telling me about it. But if you're familiar with it, you'll pick up the similarities, but there's also some differences with Tigerlust, and that's why I think Tigerlust is probably one of my favorite Ensar fragrances. It's really a toss-up for me between EO number 1 and Tigerlust. And the reason that I think Tigerlust is in the lead is that for Tigerlust, it features more of an animalic heart, is the way that I kind of perceive it. EO number 1 features many kind of vintage-like accords, and it is extremely wearable. I would have no problem wearing EO number 1 to the office. Tigerlust, on the other hand, I may pause a little bit before I decide to wear it to the office, because Tigerlust features this unforgiving animalic heart. It's called Tigerlust, and it's a great name for the fragrance, because there is this and instantly you start to get it. That ambergris accord that I mentioned comes after that extremely spicy type opening. Almost no citruses, by the way. I should mention that. Whenever you spray in the opening, you'll notice that it is almost devoid of citrus. There is a note that gives off a citrus profile, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But you're going to get this peppery, turmeric, all-spicy start that blends into that sort of ambergris, Ensar ambergris, if you will, that immediately kicks into that animalic, castoreum, and civet mixed with oud, that woody oud profile. And so Tigerlust features more of that animalic heart. That's one of the biggest differences between EO number 1 and Tigerlust to me. And when you take into consideration these types of animalic fragrances, the types of animalic fragrances that I like. So if I started naming off stuff like, you talk about something like Furio, or you talk about something like Antaeus, or you talk about something like Koros, or, those type of vintage animalic fragrances, to me, this is not super animalic. So even though I think this is one of the more animalic Ensars that I've smelled, and I must admit, if you go to Parfumo and look at his catalog of scents, it is a mile long. There are like 17 pages of stuff that he has, and the reason is obviously he puts something out and it's a limited distribution. It gets discontinued instantly almost, and then new stuff ends up coming out, right? And so in that sense, he's very similar to the way that Russian Adam does things and Bortnikov does things, and that they're very limited releases normally. But even though I would say it's animalic for an Ensar perfume, it is, I wouldn't consider this super animalic and challenging compared to, let's say, vintage perfumes, or even some of the artisanal perfume genres, if you want to call it that. For example, Dmitry Bortnikov's work, Russian Adam's work with Areej Dore. I think that genre where kind of the creator gets his hands dirty and does everything from soup to nuts on the creation. I think that Bortnikov, Areej Dore, even something like Rising Phoenix. I got sent this the other day from Rising Phoenix, thanks to my buddy Eddie. And I just swipe a little bit on before bed, and I'm addicted to it. I've been putting this on before bed for like a week straight. It's a 2017 batch of a fragrance called Mitikina King. Mitikina King from 2017. And it's a beautiful animalic oud. Fantastic. The animalics in there come in waves. And I think even something like that is more animalic than what you get in Tigerlust. So there is animalic features here, but I want you to understand that I think Ensar's profile is just that he doesn't like the extremely animalic fragrances. Like, for example, whenever I had Russian Adam on the channel, one of the things he said, and I completely agree, is he said, it almost feels like we're stricken with a disease, us people who love animalics, because we always want more. We want more oud, more castoreum, more barnyard, more funk, more of that pissy civet, or that metallic castoreum, or, the hyrax that adds this sort of warmth to it, right? We want more. And I'm in that camp for sure. And so this, while it still scratches the itch that I crave for that sort of animalic side of things, I think that if you are someone who's worried about it being too animalic, you could still go for this, is where I'm coming from, because I think this is eminently wearable. It does have a little bit of that funk for multiple reasons, which we'll talk about, but it also has that sparkling, easy to wear sort of Ensar DNA on the other side of things as well. So just something to note. Okay, so if you listen to Ensar talk on the subject, one of the reasons that he says that his ouds are not as barnyard, or, not as funky, or not like fertilizer chips like some other houses, has to do with the fact that he does not soak his ouds at all. He doesn't soak them. And there's all different ways to distill ouds. There's different, mechanics of it. And there's different strategies, there's different tactics, there's different styles, and each style kind of adds something different. But Ensar's whole thing from the very beginning is he says that, he wants to just put the heart and soul of the oud tree into the bottle, right? And he doesn't want to add anything else. And even if you soak in water, the water that you soak it in has some sort of minerals. The copper pot that you distill it in has some sort of smell. The steel pot maybe has a different smell, which goes with this oud versus that oud. And so, all of these little details change the smell of the oud that you're smelling. And it's an interesting point. I don't know enough about the topic, I think, to even speak intelligently about it. I am not a oud head like some people, although I really feel like I'm kind of turning into one. But I'm not an old school oud head that's been doing this for decades, where, I've been deep in the oud game since 2004, and, that's not who I am. So even though I would say I'm more knowledgeable than the average person, my knowledge of oud as far as the creation of it, the process goes, whether you take sinking agarwood, or whether you take Moroccan agarwood, or whether you soak it, whether you don't soak it, how you distill, I don't know any of that. That stuff is all foreign language to me. And so because of that, it's just something that I want to mention, but I don't think that, I can't sit here and debate what Ensar says, let's say, because I honestly just don't know. I'll take him at his word, though, that soaking does change the smell of the oud that you're getting. And so because he doesn't soak the oud, I think that's one of the reasons that he says it doesn't give off the sort of, barnyardy like profile that you get in other ouds. I don't know if that's true or not, but just something to mention. So, and the next thing, so imagine this picture that I'm trying to paint for you for this particular scent. So you have Ensar claims this process of not soaking takes kind of the heart and soul of the tree and puts it in the bottle. So how does an Ensar Animalic perfume smell? Because this is what I imagine, and this is what I imagine Ensar's shot at making a super animalic fragrance smells like. And again, it's not super animalic when you compare it to, let's say, other things from the past. If you smelled stuff like Joint by Poron by Rocco Barocco, or, these vintage fragrances, as far as animalics go, I think they surpass this. But this is his take on an animalic. So what does it smell like? Well, it smells like spices, it smells like smokes, it smells like smoke. There's definitely a smoky element to the oud here. And it smells like animalics. And that wearable aspect really never goes away for me. I get lots of woody, slightly rotten oud wood mixed with sandalwood that smells of the highest quality. And I've got some amazing sandalwood oils, thanks to Russian Adam. And I've got some amazing oud oils, thanks to Russian Adam. And the sandalwood in the oud in this seems definitely like it is of the highest quality. There's no doubt about that. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And one of the things that did jump out to me, though, is I like to play this game where I like to smell the fragrance first, and I like to ignore the note listing. Like, don't even look at it. Smell the fragrance, make my notes, and then come back and look at the notes. And one of the things that jumped out to me when I tested this for the first time, without looking at any of the notes, is I thought that this was a combination of three main things, is what I basically jotted down. Oud, iris, and animalics. Those were the three main things that my nose kind of picked out first with the spices. And if you've been following my channel, I've told you all before that one of my favorite combinations of all time is two things: leather and iris. Those two combinations, for me, it's a killer combination. And some of my all-time favorite fragrances have that combination. Think of things like this. Think of things like Knize Ten, which I want a vintage bottle of very, very bad. This is a current version. It's still amazing. But I would love a vintage bottle of this. Think of things like Queer Knize by Dore. Think of things like this. One of my favorite leathers of all time, Vintage Bel Ami. This stuff is absolutely amazing. And I turned Russian Adam onto this, and he reported back and he agreed that he thought that the perfumer, without using any real musk or, real ambergris or anything like that, created this amazing perfume. This is the first reformulation, but it's actually one of my favorite versions of Bel Ami, because it just feels a little bit more, it feels a little bit more, how do you say it? Almost like they rounded off some of the edges, and it feels more posh, like if you were going to wear Bel Ami to like a night out at the opera or something, you didn't want to wear kind of the really vintage, harsher version of Bel Ami, this is what I would go for. And this is one of my favorite leather fragrances of all time. I've said it before, and it's that mixture of orris and iris. Or if you smelled stuff like Roja's Great Britain, that's a fantastic mixture of leather and iris. And you get that combination in Tigerlust. There's a little bit of this, this leathery feel in Tigerlust. So think of the leather on these little leather pouches here. Think of the leather like this that you're smelling. That's a great representation of the leather that you actually get from the... Oh, it's a beautiful smell, by the way. So there's a little bit of this, and I think it's coming from the castoreum, is my guess. I think the castoreum is sort of giving it this leathery feel, which is why castoreum is my favorite. It's my favorite animalic note. And it feels kind of dirty, and the leather, the castoreum in here in Tigerlust feels like you're smelling something that comes across as slightly metallic and maybe like this slight petrol vibe. So I don't want you I don't want you to think of Dior's Fahrenheit. It's not like that. But imagine that you're smelling something that gives off a slight petrol fume vibe, the smokiness of the oud, I think, mixed with the, metallic sort of warmth of the castoreum gives off this this petrol-like vibe. And it mixes with this extremely high quality orris root. The orris in this is, oh, it's absolutely stunning. And it's there. You can get it. If your nose is accustomed to picking up that iris, you will smell it. There's no doubt about it. And then on top of that, that's where you add three types of oud. So the three types of oud in the composition just absolutely shine as far as I'm concerned. The Ensar website claims that there's artisanal Chinese oud, there is Sri Lankan oud, and Morocco oud, or is it Morocco or Morocco? I'm going to say Morocco. Fantastic oud cocktail that for me shows off kind of all of my favorite nuances of oud, because you get all of these smoky, woody elements minus the barnyard element. So imagine like a big barnyard Indian oud. Take that barnyard out, and the blend of ouds here is absolutely fantastic. Slightly chocolatey, slightly coffee-like. You get this almost coffee feel with the woodiness here. And I, I actually really like the traditional barnyard Indian oud, as I've said before, and it feels like what's interesting about this fragrance is you can get kind of as nerdy with this scent as you want, because when you wear it, the first time you wear it, you might almost think that there is some barnyard elements to the oud, but the more that I've worn this, and this is only the third time I've worn it. This is only the third time I've worn it. He didn't send it to me full because he had also worn it as well. But this is the third time that I've worn it, and the more that I've worn the fragrance, the more that I've noticed that I think that sort of animalic bit that you think might be a barnyard like oud is not actually coming from the oud. It's coming from this sort of blend of castoreum and civet. And the castoreum and civet kind of mix with this oud, which the oud doesn't feel clean because it's blending with this animalic, this soup of animalics, if you will. There are some skanky elements that are mixed in. But I think it has more to do with sort of the woody profile with smoke. So imagine this woody, oudy profile with smoke over here and animalics over here. It's not barnyard oud that you're smelling. It's the cleaner oud, I think, with this sort of undertone of smoke and resins mixed with the castoreum and the civet to kind of create that that animalic feel. And the oud has also this resinous profile. So there's this sort of ambery, benzoin-y profile that you get from it in the base, and maybe a hit of this animalic muskiness, if you will. I wouldn't be surprised if Ensar used the musk pod skin instead of the inside of the musk pod, because when you just use the inside of the musk pod, it usually comes across as more powdery. This comes across as more leathery. So I would guess that he kind of used the skin of the musk pod, which if I was creating a musk fragrance, that's what I would use, because it comes across as leathery and more dirty. And, you know, if you know the way that Russian Adam used the skin of the musk pod in something like this, for example. Where did it go? Ah. Inverno Russo. This is full bottle worthy for me. Inverno Russo. Oh, fuck. Man, what a fantastic fragrance this is. And this is why, for fragrance lovers, again, I've said it before, but I'll say it again. There's nowhere else to go. I mean, honestly, there isn't. What are you going to go do? Buy the new Dior Homme 2020? Or you're going to go buy the new Versace fragrance if you love fragrances? No, there's nowhere else to go. You either go vintage or you go with stuff like this. Stuff like this. You know, there is... obviously, there's competition in this space. But to me, these guys are almost like teammates, you know, because they're trailblazing a path that, you know, while maybe a generation in the future, they might look back and say, this guy did this first, this guy did this first. To me, they're together kind of blazing this path of showing us what real ingredients smell like, what real oud smells like, what real musk smells like, what real ambergris smells like. Whereas these other houses, they're putting the word oud on the bottle, but we're not getting it. We're getting black oud or limbinol, all this other crap that they throw in there to you know, make it smell like oud. And they're raking in billions of profits. You know, Tom Ford just sold his brand for what, $2.8 billion? And Ensar tells the story that Tom Ford tried to get a piece of oud wood to photograph from him when they launched Tom Ford's oud wood in 2007, and they didn't even want to buy it. They wanted to rent it because it was too expensive to buy, they said. They didn't even own one piece of real oud. And so that is the difference, and you can really smell it. So if you smelled something like Inverno Russo, oh fuck, it's you'll know that sort of musk pod skin that I'm talking about here, and it adds this sort of leathery, animalic side to the musk that I love. That's how I would, you know, if I ever make a fragrance, And I would love for Russian Atom to be the one to make that fragrance for me. I would want the musk to be the musk pod skin, the outer part of it. And, you know, that's kind of what it feels like here, is why I bring that up. So I wouldn't be surprised also smelling this Tigerlust. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of this sort of ambery beeswax mixed with coffee. So I mentioned coffee earlier with the oud, but when you smell it, you know, the oud some sort of gives off this coffee. Imagine like coffee and beeswax is the two notes that kind of came to mind. But I was thinking of, if you've ever put like a, you know, if you ever put like a solid, you can buy like the actual bees, what do they call it? Like the honeycomb itself. You ever put that in like a hot tea or something, kind of watched it dissolve? That's sort of the image that comes to mind when I think about the way that this smells in my mind's eye, like this beeswax and coffee like accord. And sometimes the oud also gives off this chocolatey profile. I don't want you to think chocolatey oud as far or as deep as something like this, because this is like the ultimate chocolate oud as far as I'm concerned. It is absolutely fantastic. Oh my God. One of the best ambers in the game too. The amber in Russian oud is, I mean, it almost bring a tear to your eye. It's so good. But there is this sort of chocolatey. It's interesting because sometimes it feels like this dirty, ambery, chocolatey profile with Tigerlust. Sometimes it feels like this clean, burning, gently oud chips. And what is so special about this fragrance, though, is it's almost like you're in your mind, you can isolate the notes. So you can put the cleaner oud over here. You can put the dirtier oud over here. You can put that coffee ambery note over here. You can put the animalics over there. You can put the tobacco over there, the blackcurrant, the fruity blackcurrant over there. You can just kind of separate the fragrance in your mind's eye and just smell it and isolate the note. It's so high quality. And there's one more pillar of this fragrance that I've avoided talking about until now, and that is, I haven't mentioned it yet, but it does play a big role. It doesn't play the front role. The front role of this fragrance, the face of the fragrance, what you smell first, is going to be the ouds, the woody profile, and the animalics. Those are the three main things. That woody oud, the other woody notes like sandalwood, and the animalics. Those three animalics kind of encompass one of the main pillars: the ambergris, the civet, and the castoreum. But there's one other aspect, and that's the floral aspect. So there's actually three main florals that are used here: frangipani, coffee blossom, and osmanthus. And frangipani, interestingly enough, the name was originally developed to sweeten the smell of leather gloves. It's what they called the perfume that they used to scent some leather gloves, frangipani. But it was actually centuries before Europeans discovered the flower, which is known as the plumeria flower. And plumerias originally grew in places like Mexico, South America, Caribbean, stuff like that. And if you've ever been to Hawaii and they place one of those leis on you, it's almost always plumerias. It's almost always frangipani. And because of that, I'm almost always associated with this tropical like smell. Dmitry Bortnikov uses frangipanis better than anyone I've ever smelled before. His frangipani use is outrageous. It is so good. The way that he uses floral notes is out of this world. And so they have this tropical, almost like smelling a jasmine with some sort of sweetener. So imagine you're smelling like jasmine with something like vanilla or custard even. Imagine jasmine with custard is a good kind of, it's a good sort of identifier. And then the final flower is what's called coffee blossoms. Very rare to smell coffee blossoms in a fragrance. And coffee blossoms or coffee flowers have this mild sort of citrus in bloom smell. So imagine something like an orange blossom. Coffee blossoms have a slight orange blossom feel. Orange blossoms have this fresh, almost citrus feel sometimes in and of itself. This citrus blossom-like smell. And, or you can also imagine this smell of something like jasmine sambac, white flowers, you know, something like that. Imagine blending them together. And they can be ever so slightly powdery. So you know how neroli can sometimes come across as slightly powdery? That's how the coffee blossoms can smell. And I think when you first spray and you get a little bit of this sort of citrus-like opening, I think it's a little bit of the coffee blossom giving this sort of citrus fruit-like smell in the opening. That's my guess. I honestly don't know. I'm just guessing here, but because I don't get much citruses in the start, so that's just kind of my guess. But there is this final puzzle piece in this, and the final puzzle piece is one of my favorite florals of all. It's turning into one of my favorite florals. I adore this fragrance in this floral in fragrances, and that is Osmanthus. Osmanthus is, I think, one of the dark knights, the dark horses in this scent, the dark tiger, if you will, because it gives off this apricot-like suede, like leather smell, and it enhances the leather from the castoreum. And the flowers, though, that trio of flowers stays back in the background. Yesterday I did a review on a fragrance called Background, interestingly enough, by Jill Sander from 1993. And the flowers here stay sort of in the background. Sorry for the bad pun. But the star of the show is the Animalics, the Oud, the smoky, woody, not even slightly medicinal. It's so good, though. And wood, you know, the Animalics, the Oud, and the woods. And the dry down brings out this beautiful, fruity tobacco. And as it continues to dry, oh, you just get, this is a 5-hour dry down. And as it continues to dry, you just sort of get this extremely masculine, fruity tobacco that, in a very traditional way, you know, so I'm talking about a fragrance that is extremely artisanal and has a very specific niche and quality, something with these type of high quality ouds and real ambergris and civet and all of these other notes. You know, this is a very targeted fragrance, and yet, you know, just like Ensar has a way of keeping his animalic fragrances very wearable, he has a way of keeping something so modern, at least to Western noses. I know in the Middle East they've been wearing stuff like this for thousands of years, but for Western noses, this is new. This is brand new. And yet, there is something very traditional about it, very traditionally masculine about it. I think a Western nose who has never smelled oud before could get accustomed to this in just a couple wears and just be perfectly fine with it. Fuck, it's so good. Let me read you the little blurb, just because maybe I missed something from the Ensar website. I'll tell you what it says. It says, Tigerlust. This perfume named itself. Typically, perfumers have a vision in mind, be it a feeling they want to evoke or a marketing theme they have to match. It didn't work that way this time. It might just be what happens when frangipani oozes into orris root, or civet gets high on Sichuan pepper. There's a image for you. Civet getting high on Sichuan pepper. When crushed ambergris sticks to blackcurrant and castoreum goes for a swim in a lake of osmanthus, you don't really know what to expect. These combinations are uncharted territory. Well, that's debatable, but we'll continue on. These combinations combined into one perfume. Pour obscene amounts of artisanal Chinese oud, Sri Lankan oud, and Morocco oud into this animalic cocktail of contrasts and steep them in vintage Timor sandalwood, which is beautiful, by the way. Very high quality sandalwood, extremely high quality sandalwood. Tobacco leaf and coffee flower. You can't help but smell it. Tigerlust. Call it primal, sensual, sexual. Call it what you will. This must be what happens when Siberian musk comes into contact with Girnops from the highest mountain peaks of Iran Jaya and they go for a stroll to the Italian countryside. You don't want to lick it or bite it or ease into a bath of it. Not just that. It's a fragrance you want to embrace, to own without the paranoia of ever running out crossing your mind, as even possible, to make it a part of you every bit as much as the steaming presence of an untamed lover's skin. This is what musk invites to, what the finest rose reinforces and Indian jasmine beautifies. Tigerlust. The top notes are discreetly citrusy, very discreetly. The heart notes shamelessly saucy, and the base all oud, sloshing oud drunk on oud. Oud, sloshing oud drunk on oud. Wow. Oud getting drunk on oud, and civet getting high on Sichuan pepper. What is going on? Now I lost my place. Restrained as best as it can by Mysore from the mid-1970s. Take any top 5 list, make that a top 10 list of the most expensive, sought-after, precious perfume ingredients, and know they're all in here, and it does smell like that. Waiting to be smelled and experienced. Those and ones most of these lists don't even know about. Decadent amounts of all of them in their most pristine form, 100% natural, undiluted extracts. Carefully proportioned not to let any one steal the show. That is true. It's very well balanced. You've smelled it, the emptiness, the lack of something or another. That olfactory crave akin to the want for oysters or full-fat gravy. You want a proper farmer's breakfast, but get Ziploc food juice to go instead. What's missing is the fullness of a flower, full spectrum, oleoresin distilled, the inherent stickiness of oak moss, and the raunchy wet granules of genuine musk. Sounds like I just had a stroke there. Granules. So take a break from the cosmetic aisle and treat yourself to age-old perfumery that stirred up all the sex appeal in the first place. A fragrance that's real, hand-bound, in full-grain Italian calf hide by Habib Dingle, leather sage of the century. These leather things are pretty badass, I'm not going to lie. Apparently the guy makes the leather for the Pope's Bibles, so he's a big shot in the leather game. But it's fantastic. Would I buy a bottle of this? Yes. Would I buy a bottle at retail? No. If I ever get a bottle discounted, I would go for it. Do Ensars ever get discounted? I don't know. That is one of the advantages of having a channel, though. I do have people reach out sometimes, and they'll be very kind and sell me stuff that maybe I don't deserve to be sold at those prices. But if I stumble across it at a fair price, would I buy this? Yes, I think this is my favorite Ensar. I even like it more than EO number 1. Eddie gave me a very fair deal on the original EO number 1, which I absolutely love. And so if a deal for the Pure Parfum of Tigerlust fell in my lap, would I get it? Yes. Would I pay retail? No. I just think, even though I'm enjoying what I'm smelling from Ensar. Now I've done videos on Jungle Kinam, EO1, EO2. I would love to smell EO3 and EO4 one day. And I've done a video on EO number 1 Assam. Now I've done one on Tigerlust. So my Ensar knowledge is starting to ramp up. I still don't think they're worth retail. When Russian Adams fragrances dropped for $200 to $250, the quality for me is, I mean, very similar. I'm not like some people where they say, oh, but Ensar uses pure ambergris instead of, and so it's worth the $1,000 you're spending. And that's an argument for another time, I guess. I still think he's overpriced. Just my opinion. And I know what people will say. Well, come on. It's like, it's a once in a lifetime purchase, or it's a, it's a gift to yourself. You have to spend a lot of money on high-end gifts. And I understand that. I understand the mindset. I still think it's overpriced. I think that Russian Adam, and he said this on one of the interviews that I did with him, he said that his goal is to bring perfume to as many people as he can, whether it's, in his last collection, he had a fragrance that was under $100. I think Russian Adam thinks about that because of who he is as a person. And I don't get that same sort of, doesn't feel like Ensar tries to bring his fragrances to the masses as much. I think he just basically says, here's the price, and whoever can afford it, great. If you can't afford it, too bad for you. Whereas I really feel like Russian Adam does his best to kind of try to make it more accommodating, let's say, to people who can't afford $500, $1,000 of fragrance, right? A bottle. So that's a little bit of a side note. Does not take away a little bit of a sidebar. You know, we can talk about pricing some other time, but it doesn't take away one bit from the fact that this is a phenomenal fragrance. I've rambled for 45 minutes on a fragrance. I should basically call this a full review. Not an initial impression, but it is sort of an initial impression for me because it's only the third time I've worn it, but I love this stuff. I am, and I have to give a special thank you to the person who sent it to me. This video would not be possible without you, so if you ever get around to watching this, thank you, my friend. It means a lot. If you have experience with Tigerlust, do let me know in the comments below. I would love to see your faces. I love interacting with you guys. There's so much knowledge and information in the community to learn, and you know, one person can't know it all. So appreciate the support, liking and subscribing, and all the stuff that I'm supposed to say as a YouTuber. Does help the channel, and it helps bring more people to the fold. Every day I get people reaching out, writing, hey, I'm new to your channel, and it's great. I love the growth that we've seen over the last year and a half. It's been fantastic, and it's all thanks to you guys. So I appreciate the support very, very much. Cheers, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.